Hello everyone. Um, I presume you're all doing fine. It's quite an age now that we've, you know, held a class like this, and we all know that it's because of the the situation on ground in the country. Um, that's why the FCS Foundation has, you know, deems it fit to set up usage, which course title is ENG 111. The topic we'll be looking at today is introduction to clauses. Introduction to clauses, and you know that would have been taught so many things while before the lockdown, and I've also taught you about the phrases in English some time ago like that. So I want to continue from here. If you have any question as regard that about the phrases and all that, you could send your questions to the WhatsApp platform, or you can reach me privately. So by the end of this class, you should be able to define a clause, state the types of clauses, and explain a relative clause and its functions within a sentence. You should explain what a relative clause is and its function within a sentence. Let's move on. So what is a clause? What is a clause? So a clause is a constituent of the largest grammatical unit, which is a sentence, which contains both a subject and a predicate. See now, it is a constituent of a sentence structure. A sentence has some constituent, that is some parts in it. One of the parts is that it is a clause. Within a sentence there is a clause, and that clause must contain a subject and a predicate. In other words, you can say that it can also be referred to as a group of words that expresses a whole event or situation containing a subject and a predicate. Now let's look at two compartments of a clause, two types of clause. See, clauses come in two flavors. You have a main clause, subordinate clause. You can also call it an independent clause and a dependent clause. So a main clause can be called an independent clause, while the subordinate clause can be called a dependent clause. Now, a main clause or independent clause can stand by itself. It can make a complete meaning and form a grammatically complete sentence. So, within a main clause, an independent clause, it can stand on its own. It has its own meaning, and the dependent or subordinate clause, relies on the presence of the main clause. It cannot make a complete meaning except if it is used with the main clause. That is when it can have its own complete meaning. Now look at these examples here. Said, I know a restaurant that you are thinking of. I know a restaurant that you are thinking of. Now this sentence contains both a main clause and a subordinate clause. The main clause there is I know a restaurant. If you split the sentence, you will see that the main clause there is what? I know a restaurant. And the main clause has a subject and the predicate. The subject there is I, the pronoun I, the one that is performing the action. Then the predicate there is know a restaurant. The predicate begins from the verb, from the predicator here, which is the verb. which is no, to the end of the sentence. So no a restaurants. So when a main clause stands alone, you can call it a simple sentence. The main clause there is no a restaurants, and when it stands alone, you can call it what? A simple sentence. Now let's look at it. The next one is that you are thinking of. That you are thinking of. That is subordinate clause there. That you are thinking of. The subject of that subordinate clause is you, and the predicate is are thinking of. So this kind of clause, this kind of subordinate clause, cannot stand on its own. It relies on the presence of the main clause. That is why it is called a subordinate, which means lesser in rank or in another's control. So that's about the main clause and the subordinate clause. So let's move on to the next phase of the lesson. I want to look at the types of clauses and their function. Types of clauses and their function. Now, the first type of clause we're going to look at in this class is a relative clause. We have other types. We have relative clause, which can also be called. You can also call it an adjectival clause. We have the adverbial clause. We also have the nominal clause. But for this video, we're going to look at relative clause. Now, a standard relative clause functions just as a standard adjective does. You know what adjective does is it modifies, it describes a noun or a pronoun or the nominals. So the same thing applicable to a relative clause. What a standard adjective does, that is what a relative clause does. It modifies, it qualifies pronoun, noun, and all other nominals. So now for you to identify, how do you identify relative clause within a sentence? This is how you can identify it. It is usually introduced by a real relative pronoun. It is introduced by a real relative pronoun, a relative adverbs, or relative determinants. That is how you can identify a relative clause in a sentence. Let's look at examples of this I'm talking about. Examples of relative clause that are introduced by relative pronoun, relative adverbs, relative determinants. Now look at this example. Relative clause with real relative pronoun. Now relative pronouns which are used to introduce relative clauses are who, whom, which, and that. You can see from that example now, all those relative pronouns are written in ink. In the red color, while the whole relative clause is in a blue color. Now the dinosaur exhibit that you have been waiting for has arrived. The dinosaur exhibit that you've been waiting for has arrived. Now the whole relative clause in the sentence is that you have been waiting for. That you have been waiting for. That's the relative clause there, which modifies the noun exhibit, which modifies the noun exhibit. So okay, which exhibit are you talking about? The one that you've been waiting for. Are you getting it now? So, but that relative clause that you've been waiting for, it is introduced by a relative pronoun, which is that. We can get that. The next example is I covet the dress which she wore to the wedding. The whole relative clause there is which you wore to the wedding, and it modifies, it describes the dress, the pronoun, the noun, the dress. But that relative clause which you wore to the party is introduced by a relative pronoun which is which. In this example, only people who know computers will succeed in the modern world. The whole relative clause there is who know computers will succeed in the modern world, and it modifies the noun people. And the relative clause there is the relative pronoun that introduces the relative clause there is who. The same thing applicable to the last example. Let us move on. Now, the next aspect is relative clause with relative adverb. Now, I'm talking about how you can identify the relative clause within a sentence, that it can be introduced by a relative real pronoun, which we have looked at earlier. And then the second one is relative clause can be introduced with relative adverbs. Now, relative adverb like when, where, and why joins the relative clause to the main clause. That's what happened in the previous example I told you. Those examples of the real relative pronoun joins the main clause joins the subordinate clause to the main clause. The same thing here too. The relative adverb also joins the subordinate clause to the main clause. It also introduces the relative clause. Now let's examine these examples. Now the workers choose a day when I will be vacationing on the French Riviera. Now the relative clause is when I will be vacationing on the French Riviera. That's the relative clause. But the relative adverb when that joins it to the main clause, which is the workers choose a day. The whole relative clause when I will be vacationing on the French Riviera modifies the noun a day, and then the relative adverb when it modifies the verb will be vacationing, telling us when will be what will be vacationing to go to the French Riviera. Then the Uncle Murray discovered the hangar where the infos, the heavy holes were hidden. Now we see that the relative adverb here joins the subordinate clause. The subordinate relative clause to the main clause, and it also introduces the relative clause. But there, what is the function it performs there is that it is describing the hangar, that is the noun, while where, which is relative adverb, modifies the verb we're hidden in the relative clause. Hager knows the reason why Jimmy Hoffa's body was never found. Now we see that why, which is relative adverb, joins the relative clause to the main clause, and the whole relative clause is describing modifying the reason, but why then modifies the verb in the relative clause were never found. So I hope that is clear. So let's move on to the next aspect. It's relative clause with relative determiners. Relative clause with relative determiners. Now, relative clause with relative determiners. You see, relative clause may also be introduced by relative determiners. See, determiners usually are used to modify noun. Now the pronoun whose and which are two common examples of this type. Pronoun whose and which are the common examples of relative determinants. So they are called relative determinant because they modify the noun that follows them. Any noun that comes after them, they modify them in the relative clause. Just like the same articles does, the article the article comes before. For example, I say the boy now, it is modifying the noun that comes after. It's the in that expression modifies the boy that comes after. It's simply applicable. So this relative determinants, it modifies the noun that comes after it. Are you getting it now? And it is also used to join the relative clause to the main clause in the sentence. Now look at this. This is the family whose dog saved our little girl. Whose dog saved our little girl. Whose dog saved our little girl. Now look at this. The relative clause there is whose dog saved our little girl. Whose dog saved our little girl, and it's the relative clause there. Whose dog saved our little girl is modifying the family, modifying the word, the family, telling us what kind of family which family am I talking about, isn't it? So, but the whose there is functioning as a determiner to the dog. It's modifying the dog. See, it is the dog that follows it, that comes after it. Are you getting it now? So it's modifying the dog, whose dog, and it is used to join the relative clause to the main clause. This is the family. But the whole relative clause there, whose dog saved our little girl, is functioning as an adjective, modifying the family. The second one, your reports are due by midnight, at which time I am going to bed. Your report are due by midnight, at which time I'm going to bed. Now, at which time I'm going to bed is the relative clause. And here's the relative clause modifying midnight, telling us more about the midnight. Okay, just by that midnight I'll be going to bed. It's describing the midnight. So relative clause there, at which time I'll be going to, is a relative clause that modifies the midnight, and it is introduced by a relative determiner, which is which. The which there is also modifying the time, telling us what time, the time. I get it now. Which time is function as a determiner. Hope that is clear. So that's that about the relative clause. So let's look at this evaluation. You could use this to evaluate yourself so far from everything we've looked at, just to test your knowledge on the topic. Now, identify the relative clauses in each of the followings and states their roles, that is, their functions in the sentences. Now, just read them. I'm buying a gift for the neighbor who helped me move. The university where my sister goes to school is in Chicago. My family is taking a trip during the month when I graduate from high school. The person to whom Candice owes the greatest gratitude is a mother. The person to whom Candice owes the greatest gratitude is her mother. So attempt this question and then test your knowledge. Thanks for watching this video. We'll continue the lesson in the next video because this one is going to take a lot of space. So we'll continue the lesson in the next video. Thanks for watching and expectant